I'm truly excited. Well, before we get started, so I want to do this caveat. I was raised Catholic. Um, my parents, or my dad now, my mom passed away recently, but they're very,
Sorry.
very devout Catholic. And so I don't know, I don't have a preview to what Dr. Raza is going to speak about, but I don't want people saying, "Well, this is anti-Catholic." Not only anti uh, Jew, it's anti-Catholic. I was raised Catholic. Um, I was taught that the church was built on quote unquote Saint Peter, using the Bible. On this rock, I build my church. That's what Catholics believe, and they also believe that the first pope of the Catholic Church was Peter. That's how, as a Catholic, that's what you are taught to believe and raised to believe, and that's why when other Protestant groups spring up, you're saying, well, ha, 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 we're the right church. We're, Peter. Peter was the first pope, and that's why God gave authority to the pope, and blah blah blah. So I'm only giving this caveat so people understand. Oh, of course this is anti-Catholic. No, I was raised it. I have friends and family that are still Catholic and believe in the faith. I My issue is not with specific Catholic folks. Just like I don't have no issue with specific Jewish people either. It's the certain tenets, the certain ideologies, the power and control, the history that I have issues with. But as far as individual folks that are still practicing on anything, even other religions that I probably don't mention, I don't have no issues with anyone specifically. So that's just the caveat I want to get out of the way before you get going, Dr. Raza.
I want to recommend one Wikipedia page, if you don't mind. It's called Seda Vacantism. Okay, let me spell it. Seda, Seda, vacant, Vacant, ism, ISM. Seda Vacantism. It's a very interesting Wikipedia page. Now, Seda Vacantism is the belief that the Vatican had been taken over by evil forces ever since the year 1958. Okay. So this is the belief that the Vatican was taken over by evil forces in the year 1958. Now, I have a question for them. Why the year 1958? Okay. So it's like in the 1917, Pope Benedict the 15th supported the Balfour Declaration. So why don't you say the Zionists took over the Vatican in 1917, right? Or even earlier, in 1832, Pope Gregory the 16th gave a medal on Karl von Rothschild. Okay, so when was the Vatican taken over? When the Pope, was it when the Pope gave a badge to the and basically handed over the bank? He said, "Okay, Karl von Rothschild, I'll hand over the Vatican Bank to you. You can be our banker from now on." Is that when the Zionists took over the bank, or was it even earlier? What about this? In the year 1452 was when the Vatican supported slavery. If you ask me, that's when the Zionists took over, way back in 1452. Okay. But even then, before then, let's go way back to the year 1120. Okay. You have to type in one more Wikipedia word, okay? If you don't mind. Type in one more Wikipedia word. Okay? It's called Sicut Judaeus. Let me spell that for you. It's two words. The first word is Sicut. Sicut. Okay? And the second word is Judaeus. Judaeis. It's like a Latin spelling. Sicut Judaeus. Can you find that one? Now, Sicut Judaeus is a papal bull which says that Christians are allowed to borrow money from Jewish moneylenders, right? So this is 1120. Okay, in the year 1120 was when the Sicut Judaeus was passed, which made it legal for Christians to borrow money from Jewish people. The reason is because a Christian cannot loan money at interest. That's a crime. That's usury. But since those Jewish people are not Christians, they can commit the crime of usury, and we Christians can borrow money from the Jewish people. So that's 1120. Okay. So when did the Zionists take over the Vatican? Maybe it goes back to 1120. So I want to talk a little bit today about the history of the Vatican, and the most important thing is, have there been any good popes since that time, since 1120? Actually, there have been. So this is very interesting when we look at the history of the Vatican and the good popes and the bad popes. So if you don't mind, I want to jump into that right now.
You have the floor.
Thanks. All right, so I'm going to do a share screen if you don't mind. All right. All right. So this is where we begin our journey into the history of the Vatican. Now, this document here is called, I hope you can read it, but it's called The Complete List of the 1030 Jewish Expulsions in Human History. Now, this is the number one Zionist propaganda manual you could ever hold your hands on. Okay, this is the complete Zionist brainwashing manual right here. So I'm going to skip down here to page 12. Okay, if you don't mind. So here we go. All right. So now it says here, in the year 976 AD, the Jews were expelled from Imola, Italy. Okay, now this is where the lie begins. Okay, in the year 976 AD, the Ashkenazi were still living in Khazaria. Okay, they had not been expelled from Italy. They weren't even living in Italy. They were living in Khazaria. So this is where the brainwashing begins. They're trying to patch in the history of the Phoenician Jews with the history of the Ashkenazi Jews, right? This is where the patch begins. From the year 976 is, and anything before that, So if you're talking of anything before the year that 985, they were expelled from Greece, 931, expelled from blah, blah, blah. So we're talking about Phoenician Jews at this point, okay? Ashkenazi Judaism did not begin until the year 1012 AD in the Mainz, Germany. Okay, can you see that date here? 1012 AD, Mainz, Germany. This was when Ashkenazi Judaism began. That's when they had left Khazaria and they settled down in Germany. Now, it's such an interesting story because this Imola, Italy, let's just come back here. Imola, Italy, Jews expelled after an attack by Ravenna. And this is documented history by C. Roth in the book of The History of the Jews of Italy, page 72. Now, it says the Jews were expelled by Ravenna. Now, who is Ravenna? Okay, there was back in the year 584 until the year 751, it was called the Exarchate of Ravenna. So this is back in the year 584 to 571. And here they're giving a date 976. So this Ravenna people didn't even exist in 976. They were gone back. They were gone back in 751. So already we see that, there's so many lies in this document, So let's come to the truth here. In the year 1012, in the Mainz, Germany, it says the Jews were expelled by Emperor Henry II. Okay, now what happened here? This was when Ashkenazi Judaism was born. So what happened in the year 1012 was Gershom ben Juna started what's called a yeshiva in the city of Mainz, Germany. Okay, now a yeshiva is a school for Babylonian Talmudism. He was the first guru, you can say, of the Ashkenazi. He started the first European school of Babylonian Talmudism. Okay, now what he was teaching people is that we Jews need to stick together because we Jews have always been attacked. We've always been criticized and ostracized and attacked. So we Jews need to stick together, and we should not interbreed with the non-Jews. Okay, this was part of the philosophy which started in 1012. That we should not interbreed with them. And in fact, if a Jew marries a non-Jew, they can actually be excommunicated from the religion. It was a crime to marry a non-Jew. So they started teaching this racist philosophy back then. And in order to kick off his new religion, he claimed that the German Holy Roman Emperor attacked the Jewish people, and so this has been going on ever since the year 1012, that these Ashkenazi claim that we were attacked, because that helps their religion. Their religious belief is that we need to stick together because we're the ones who've always been attacked, So that religion was born in 1012. And so you see that first date, 1012, Gershom ben Judah claimed that his community there in Mainz, Germany was attacked. Whether or not they were really attacked, and nobody knows, but they claim that. And when they claim that, that helps their little group stay together and stay separate from the non-Jews. So that was the birth of this, what's going on today, basically. Now, in my opinion, when you talk about the history of the Vatican, you might as well just divide it into two periods, because it's like you have the period of the Vatican when they were dealing with Phoenician Jews, and then you have the period of the Vatican when they were dealing with Ashkenazi Jews. And these are two completely separate groups of people, So talking about what the Vatican in the days of the Phoenician Jews is completely irrelevant to what's going on today, because today the problems we're facing is coming from Ashkenazi Jews, and that problem didn't really begin until the year 740 AD, right? 740 AD was when those Ashkenazi first converted to Judaism. So it's basically pointless to talk about the history of the Vatican anytime before 740 AD, because before 740 AD, they were dealing with a completely separate group of people, right? So I want to divide it into four different periods, okay? So we have the 740 AD was the conversion of the Khazars to Judaism. And then in the year 969 was when the Khazars were expelled from Khazaria and they settled down in Europe. And then in the year 1120 was the Sicut Judaeus. You remember that papal document where the popes could make a deals. So it's like these are the most important time periods, What was the relationship of the Vatican when the Khazars were still living in Khazaria? And what was the relationship of the Vatican when the Khazars had been removed from Khazaria and they were first settling in Europe? And then what happened after the year 1120, after they got the Sicut Judaeus? And then it kept going until the year 1452. And that's when the Pope allowed them to conduct slavery. As you know, most of the slave ships were owned by Jewish people, So that was an agreement between the Pope and the Jewish people that we're going to allow, At first it was, you know, just the Portugal, and then later Spain could also do slavery. Now, we're going to talk about this first time period of the when the Khazars were still living in Khazaria. And this is a little bit of a review. I mean, we already did a show about the history of Khazaria, but I think it's pretty important to review that. So it was around the year 740 that the Khazars converted to Judaism. And then from the year 755 to 780, there was a Byzantine emperor known as Leo the Khazar, right? So you have a Khazarian emperor on the Byzantine throne. And then later in 833, Emperor Theophilus helped the Khazars to build the Sarkel fort. So this is a Byzantine emperor who was sending money and troops to go help the Khazars build a fortress to defend their territory. Now, in the year 850 was when the first Khazar settled down in Rome. This is very interesting, okay? So the Khazars were still living in Khazaria, and the one Khazar moved to Rome and he set up a bank, okay? So his name was Moses ben Meshulam, and he set up a first bank in Rome, which is known as the Kalonymus Bank or the Kalonymus Family Bank. Maybe I should spell that. You can look that up in the future. It's very important. Kalonymus. Kalonymus family was the first banking family to settle down in Rome. So that's where the Ashkenazi got their start from, was from this first banker. And the first bank he created was in Rome, and the second bank he created was in Lucca, Italy. So the Kalonymus family was the beginnings of the Ashkenazi. And at that time, they were still living in Khazaria, right? The Kalonymus family, right? So at this time, the Khazars were still living in Khazaria, and he was the first banker to move to Rome and set up the first bank. And the Pope at the time was okay with that, So this was in the year 850, okay, when the Kalonymus family first moved to Rome. Okay, now the next event was the 895. Okay, 895 was Leo the Wise. Leo the Wise was a Byzantine emperor who lost a battle in the year 895. It's called the Battle of Bulgaro-Phygon. And he lost that battle, and he felt that the Khazars betrayed him. So this Byzantine emperor, Leo the Wise, started cutting ties with the Khazars. That's kind of why he has the name Leo the Wise. It was pretty wise of him to start cutting ties with the Khazars. Anyway, now in the year 920, Rabbi Moses of Lucca. Okay.
I'm getting Leo the Sixth. Is that Leo the Sixth?
Leo the Wise, Leo the Sixth, also Leo the Wise, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now I'm kind of trying to go a little quickly here. So in the year 920, Rabbi Moses of Lucca and his son moved to Mainz, Germany. Now, this is very important. So we talked about this Kalonymus family. They were the first Khazarian bankers. And so they had set up a bank in Rome, and they had set up a second bank in Lucca, Italy. Okay. Now, they had sent this rabbi called Rabbi Moses of Lucca. He was the first Ashkenazi rabbi to arrive in Germany and start setting up this Khazarian communities in Germany. Okay, so that was in the year 920. Now, the next one is in the year 927, Emperor Romanos I was a Byzantine emperor who completely cut the ties with the Khazars. He said, no more. And basically, he told the Christians, those Khazars are our enemies, and you can go attack them and do what you want. And then in the 950, this Kalonymus family, Kalonymus ben Moses, he was the third, I think, in the line of the Kalonymus family, and his banks in Rome and Lucca really prospered. Now, finally, we're coming to the year 969, and this was when Sviatoslav I of the Kievan Rus invaded Khazaria, and that's when the Khazars lost their homeland, right? And so that's when they started migrating into Europe, right? There was another one of these Kalonymus family. His name was Meshulam the Great. Okay, Meshulam the Great. He was a rabbi, a Ashkenazi rabbi from Rome, and he started a debate against these Phoenician Jews. Okay, this is very interesting. In the year 976, the first Ashkenazi rabbi tried to get into a debate with the first Phoenician rabbi. It's such a very interesting, and so that's when these Phoenician Jews would not accept the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, the Phoenician Jew said, no, we have our own Talmud. It's called the Jerusalem Talmud. We don't accept your interpretations of a book which you didn't even write yourself. The Babylonian Talmud was just a book which they stole from the Iraqi Jews. So anyway, that was when they started this big split between the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud, or what you can say, the Phoenician Jews and the Ashkenazi Jews. This debate started back and forth, in the year 976. And this was happening in Rome, okay? And of course, the Ashkenazis claimed they won the debate. Now, and then they labeled all those Jews who did not accept the Babylonian Talmud. They said, you guys are Karaites. Karaite Judaism. I think we did this last time. It's, maybe I can spell it again. Karaite. Maybe you can look that up. Okay. So Karaite Judaism, this was the name that the Ashkenazi Jews gave to the Sephardic Jews, all the dark-skinned Jews who would not accept the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, so you had there was many dark-skinned Jews. There was the Sephardic Jews, the Maghrebi Jews, the Mizrahi, the Yemenite Jews. There was many dark-skinned Jews, and they all followed the Jerusalem Talmud. And then all of a sudden, these white-skinned Jews showed up, and they had a book called the Babylonian Talmud. And anybody who did not accept the Babylonian Talmud, they were labeled as a Karaite Jew. Karaite Jew means somebody who did not accept the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, so this was and that's what the Spanish Inquisition was about. The Spanish Inquisition was to wipe out Karaite Judaism. Okay, these are the dark-skinned Jews who did not accept the Babylonian Talmud. It was to wipe them out, right? So this debate goes back to 976 between this Karaite Judaism and this Babylonian Talmudists, you can call them, or the Ashkenazi. All right. So you ready to go on?
Absolutely.
All right. So in the year 970, Holy Roman Emperor Otto II borrowed money from the Kalonymus bankers in Rome to go fight the Muslims in southern Italy, right? So a German emperor came down and borrowed money from this Jews, in Rome, so he could go fight against the Muslims in the southern Italy. So this helped the Jews a lot. So they made a lot of money when you have a Holy Roman Emperor borrowing money from them. Then in the year 1012 was when Gershom ben Judah moved to Mainz and started the first yeshiva, the first German school for Babylonian Talmudism, right? As I mentioned, that's when he started telling his community, you can't marry those non-Jews, and he started off with this, what they call the pogrom of 1012. He claims that they were attacked, but they probably weren't attacked. They just used that as an excuse so that their tribe could be more cliquish, stay away from the non-Jews, right? So this started in the year 1012. Gershom ben Judah started this Babylonian Talmud Yeshiva. That's the name for his school. All right. So now in the same year, in the year 1012, Kalonymus III and his brother Hananel went to Germany, and they set up banks, one in Mainz, Germany, and the other in Speyer, Germany. So this was when these Ashkenazi started setting up their first banks in Germany in the year 1012. Now, in the year 1015, Holy Roman Emperor Henry II borrowed money from these Jewish bankers so that he could go fight his third invasion of Poland. His third invasion of Poland was the first successful invasion of Poland because he was able to borrow money from these Ashkenazi moneylenders who had set up their banks in Germany. Now, this greatly helped them very much when they had Roman emperors borrowing money from them. Now, in the year 1096 was when there was the crusade. It's called the First German Crusade, when the German people actually did rise up in Germany and raided the houses of the Jewish people, because these Jewish people had been making so much money, and they felt it was unfair. So this was called the First German Crusade in 1096, right? So, but what happens is whenever, so we looked at this document. It's called 1030 Jewish expulsions, and they're going to claim, so many things happened here. So, they list in this year we were kicked out of that city, and in this year we were kicked out of that city. So what happens is, like, some Jewish person is like walking down the street and somebody looks at him in the wrong way, and he writes a big story. Oh, we were beaten, we were burned at the stake, we were expelled from the city, so they make all these stories just because somebody looked at him the wrong way on the street. They love making these stories. So we don't really know what happened in any of these events. Maybe they broke into their house and robbed their safe or something, and then they claimed that we were expelled, and they accused us of murdering their children, right? they like to make up these stories also. Yeah. So anyway, this began in the year 1096, when it's pretty likely that the German people did actually rise up and did actually raid their homes because they were sick of these people making so much money off of this money lending, right? So anyway, let's come now. In the year 1101 was the first Ashkenazi synagogue built in the city of Rome. Okay, so these bankers had become so successful, the Pope allowed them to build a synagogue, not just a yeshiva, not just a normal school, but a complete synagogue, like huge synagogue, and this was in the year 1101, and that led up to the Sicut Judaeus. You remember, like I said, 1120 was when the first pope signed the first Sicut Judaeus, right? So, yeah, 1120. So that was Pope Calixtus II. Pope Calixtus II was the first pope to sign the first Sicut Judaeus. So the reason that this Wikipedia page is important is because you can learn a lot about history by looking at the history of which popes signed the Sicut Judaeus and which popes did not sign the Sicut Judaeus. Okay? So I want to take you on a little bit of history of this period from 1120 until 1425, which were the good popes and which were the bad popes. Okay, which popes refused to sign the Sicut Judaeus and which pope signed it, like a good little puppet. Okay, so let me take you on that little history, if you don't mind. So we have in the year 1139 was when Pope Innocent II granted permission to the Knights Templar, right? So, as I talked about in one of our previous shows, 1120 was when the first Pope signed the Sicut Judaeus, and 1139 was when they gave permission to the Knights Templar to start the Knights Templar banks, right? So the Knights Templar were working together with these Ashkenazi money lenders, right? So this was when the popes were all in approval of this stuff, and but finally, in the year 1144, there was opposition to this within the Vatican. There was a group of people said, "Wait a minute, we have to stop this," and this is called the Commune of Rome. In the year 1144, they created a commune and they actually banned the Pope. The Pope had to go into exile. This commune took over Rome and kicked out the Pope. He said, "All you popes are just corrupt," So the Pope, there was a series of popes in exile for 44 years because the Catholics had taken over the Vatican and kicked out the popes. So it's a very interesting period of history. It's called the Commune of Rome, which lasted from 1144 to 1188. And during that period, the Sicut Judaeus did not exist. None of these popes were able to sign this. However, during this period, there was one pope by the name of Alexander III, who was a pope in exile, and this pope passed a law to protect the Jewish people, and that was in the Third Lateran Council. So in the year 1179, Pope Alexander III tried to do this Third Lateran Council to protect the Jewish people, but he was a pope in exile because during that time, the Catholics had taken over the Vatican. So anyway, finally, in the year 1188, Pope Clement III brought an agreement between the Vatican and the popes who were in exile. They made agreement and said, "Okay, popes, you can come back to the Vatican," and they made agreement, and so he wasn't able to sign this Sicut Judaeus. That was what the agreement was about, really. But eventually corruption came back in again. And in the year 1191, Pope Celestine III signed the Sicut Judaeus again. So this is a story. There was good popes and bad popes and people who were trying to stop this Sicut Judaeus, and finally a puppet pope would be put back in again, and he would sign the Sicut Judaeus again. And in the year 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council, by Pope Innocent III, he also created laws to protect the Jewish people. In the year 1234, Pope Gregory IX signed a papal bull called Perpetuus Servetus Judaeorum. Okay. So Pope Gregory the Ninth signed that to protect the Jewish people. Now, in the year 1236, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II signed the Survey Camerae Regis. Now, this was when the German kings said, wait a minute, we need to get on the act, because all these popes are borrowing money from Jewish moneylenders. Now the German kings actually started a competition. It's like, so there was some competition between the German Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope down there at the Vatican. So anyway, so now finally, in the year 1239, a guy named Nicholas Donin convinced Gregory the Ninth to start burning the Talmud. This is a very important piece of history. Now, I think what's happening here is this was a precursor to the Spanish Inquisition. So the Jews wanted the Pope to attack the Jewish people, right? The Jewish people wanted the Pope to attack them. And this Pope started burning the Talmud. Okay. So it's a very interesting. But I think that this was what you called controlled opposition. The Jewish people wanted the Pope to burn the Talmud because they wanted these dark-skinned Jews to be suppressed. You remember the Karaite Jews who did not accept the Babylonian Talmud. They wanted the Pope to start burning Talmuds because they wanted the Pope to burn the Jerusalem Talmuds so that they could start promoting their Babylonian Talmud. So this is a controlled opposition Pope. I think that's my theory about this. So again, this is, let me repeat. This is 1239. Pope Gregory the Ninth supposedly started burning Talmuds. So it's not clear whether this was a good pope or a bad pope. Maybe he was just burning Talmuds because he was a controlled opposition pope. That's my theory. Okay, so now let me jump back into here. Finally, in the year 1264, we did finally get a good pope, okay? So his name was Pope Clement IV. Now, this is just my theory here, but Pope Clement IV also started burning Talmuds, but he would not play along with the game of only burning the Jerusalem Talmud. He also started burning the Babylonian Talmud. So this was when their plan backfired. Their plan to get the popes to fight against the Sephardic Jews and support the Ashkenazi Jews, that plan backfired in the year 1264 when Pope Clement IV started burning both the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic Talmuds. Now, in the year 1271, Pope Gregory X was brought into power after 3 years papal election. Okay, so that previous pope who had burned the Talmud, he created such a problem that after he died, they could not elect a new pope for 3 years. They were fighting, so much fighting. The Jewish people were trying to get a Jewish supporting pope in power, and finally they did, So that was Pope Gregory X in the year 1271. Pope Gregory X was brought into power, and he, of course, signed the Sicut Judaeus. We're coming into something very interesting. There was a series of 6 or 7 good popes in a row here, which tried to fight against these Jewish bankers. So I'm going to try to go through their names really quickly. The first one was Pope Celestine V, and he was only a pope for 5 months, and he tried to clean up, make some changes in the church. And then you had in the year Pope 1294, Pope Boniface the Eighth was a pope for 9 years. He also tried to make changes, but he died in prison. Okay, so this pope who tried to clean up the church died in prison. And then in the year 1303, Pope Benedict the 11th came to power for only 8 months. He also died in prison. And then in the year 1305, Pope Clement V was a pope for 9 years, and he did some good changes. And one thing he managed to do was he banned the Knights Templar. Okay, so there's a pope who banned the Knights Templar, and in the year 1316, Pope John the 22nd was pope for 18 years, and he tried to clean up the church. And one of the changes he made was he banned witchcraft. Now, the interesting thing about that is when he banned witchcraft, the Babylonian Talmud was considered a part of witchcraft. Okay, so in the year 1326, this Pope John the 22nd, when he banned witchcraft, he also banned Babylonian Talmudism. So that was a big setback for the Jewish people there in Rome. So, and then finally, Pope Benedict the 12th was a pope for 8 years, and he also tried to make some changes. And he was the last pope who was like rebellious, because after him, the bankers got puppets back in power. Okay, so that was in the year 1324, the conclave voted in favor of Pope Clement VI, and when Pope Clement VI back in, he was the puppet pope back in the year 1342, and he signed the Sicut Judaeus again, right? Then you had the Pope 1352, Pope Innocent VI. He tried to change it back again. He tried to change he tried to stop these Jewish people and change the church, but he didn't succeed. And but he managed so that there was no Sicut Judaeus for 10 years. So for 10 years, he didn't sign that. And then in 1362, Pope Urban V signed the Sicut Judaeus. So he was a puppet pope for 8 years. And then finally, in the year 1378, it was called the Western Schism. And the Western Schism was when the church was completely torn apart. And this whole schism was about whether or not the Pope should be borrowing money from Jewish people or not, right? So during this Western Schism, there was some popes who were in favor of borrowing money from Jews and some popes who were not in favor. So let me just let me real quick give you that list. Urban the Sixth was not in favor of borrowing money from the Jewish people. Pope Boniface the Ninth was in favor. Then you have Innocent the Seventh, who was not in favor. Gregory the 12th, who was not in favor. And then after all these popes who were not in favor of borrowing money from Jewish people, then you have a period of 2 years where there was no pope at all. They couldn't elect a pope anymore. And finally, Pope Martin V was brought in power as a puppet banker, and he signed the Sicut Judaeus. Okay, so in 1417, Pope Martin V was brought in. It ended the Western Schism. They had a puppet banker in place for 14 years. Okay. Yep, Sicut Judaeus. So this is, you can just follow this. You can see whichever pope signed the Sicut Judaeus, you can know which pope was a puppet pope. Okay, so let's let's come back here to the was there any last of these good popes? There was. In the year 1431, Pope Eugene IV did not sign the Sicut Judaeus, and in 1444 he issued a papal bull called Dundum ad nostrum audentiem. And this papal bull really was a setback for the Jewish people. You know, it basically said, these guys are perpetual troublemakers. And so when that pope, okay, so that's very interesting. In 1431, Pope Eugene IV was one of the last of the good popes who tried to stop this Sicut Judaeus. But finally, after him, in the year 1452, was when the bankers got their puppet pope in place again. And that's when they got slavery. Okay, so in 1452 was Pope Nicholas V, and he's not only did he sign the Sicut Judaeus, but he basically signed the Sicut Judaeus forever. It's like from now on, Sicut Judaeus lasts forever. And not only did he sign the Sicut Judaeus to last forever, but he was also the same pope who gave permission for this slavery. Okay, so Pope Nicholas V, he was, if you ask my opinion, when did the Zionists take over the Catholic Church? This is a pretty good indication. 1452, when the Pope Nicholas V signed the Sicut Judaeus forever, and he
You're not
also
going by the nose, are you?
by the I don't know.
Sorry, terrible joke.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to get through this last little period, if you don't mind. I'm going to try to get through this last little period of what happened after slavery, after 1452. I'm going to try to, was there any good popes then who tried to fight the system after slavery? There were, actually. There was some good popes and some bad popes. So I'm going to try to go through this last little list of what happened after 1452.
And before you get started, and just real
Mm-hmm.
quick, so Dr. Raz and I didn't do any pre notes or any of that stuff. Everything that he's talking about, I'm pulling it up, and it's coming up. So, um, if I'm being able to do it, I'm sure you guys will be able to do it. As soon as he says the name, I'm just trying to keep up with him and putting it on the screen just to show you that he's just not making this up. You can verify it yourself. So I just wanted to make that little note.
Right. Thanks. All right. So here we go. The now in the year 1455, this was just 3 years after that other pope passed the law for slavery. So just 3 years later came a good pope who tried to stop it and change the system. So his name was Pope Calixtus III. And Pope Calixtus III rejected the Jewish interpretation of law. Is very important. And he attempted, there was an attempted assassination against him. Pope Calixtus III, there was attempted assassination against him. And there was even a riot which broke out after he died. So this was a very controversial pope. He tried to stop, even after they got their slavery, a good pope snuck his way into power and tried to end that system of corruption, but it didn't work, of course. Then finally, this is a very interesting. In the year 1462, the Franciscans opened a bank called the Monte de Pieta, which means the mount of piety or the mount of social service, right? This is so interesting. So, as you know, the Franciscans are a Catholic order, right? The Franciscans are recognized by the Catholic Church, and they're an order of monks, right? So these monks, they don't own anything, but they have a lot of supporters who donate money to them. And so these supporters ask them, what do you want to do with this money which we're donating to you? And these Franciscan monks said, we want to open a bank to help the Christians, because right now the Christians only can borrow money from these Jewish people. So now we want to create a Franciscan bank, which is a competition to these Jewish banks. So that's why it was called the Monte de Pieta, the Mount of Piety, because the Franciscans wanted to help the Christians. We want you to borrow money from our bank, and we're not going to charge you interest on the loan. That's why if you go to the Jewish bank over there, you're going to have to pay a lot of interest on the loan. If you come to the Franciscan bank, then then you won't have to pay interest on the loan. So this is a very interesting. So the Franciscans started the first bank to combat Jewish money lending in the year 1462. Okay. And this wasn't the first. They opened many banks, right, to combat Jewish money lending, right? So this is a very interesting. These are Catholics who were fighting against Jewish money lending way back in 1462. And then you had this is let me just mention one other pope here. This is kind of interesting. There was a Franciscan pope by the name of Pope Sixtus IV who did an investigation into the murder of Simon of Trent. Okay, Simon of Trent was supposedly a child who was murdered by the Jewish people, and he became a saint. Okay, it's very interesting, right? Are there any Catholic saints who died because being murdered by Jewish people? Yes, there's 3 Catholic saints who died because supposedly murdered by Jewish people. Okay, Pope. So now we're on Pope Sixtus IV, right? So popes. Okay, so what happened was, let me just tell you the story. The Germans supposedly found a dead child who was supposedly ritual murdered, right? And they blamed the Jewish people on it. So this pope had to send like an inquiry to investigate this murder charge, right? And the pope. So now this was a puppet pope. So the reason he had to send this investigation to Germany was because he was basically forced to send it. Germany was requiring him, and so he did it. He investigated, was this child really murdered by Jewish people, and there was no findings on his investigation, right? So this was a puppet pope, okay? But it's interesting to mention that there was this Catholic saint who was supposedly murdered by Jewish people. Maybe we'll go back into that point later. It's a very important point. Now I want to come to a very important year here. This is Pope Sixtus IV. Pope Sixtus IV. Now in the year 1478, he endorsed the Spanish Inquisition. Okay. Pope Sixtus IV. Now, what does it mean? Pope Sixtus IV endorsed the Spanish Inquisition. Okay, the Spanish Inquisition was when the Jewish people tricked the Christians into invading other Jewish people, right? It was basically white-skinned Jews who wanted the Christians to annihilate the dark-skinned Jews, right? This was the Babylonian Talmudists who wanted to wipe out the Jerusalem Talmud. That's what you call Karaite Judaism. The Ashkenazi wanted to wipe it out. So now, why did this Pope uh, support the Spanish Inquisition? Well, obviously, it's because he was a puppet Pope, right? But he might have been tricked into it, meaning that he didn't realize what was really going on was that white-skinned Jews were attacking dark-skinned Jews. He might have been tricked into supporting the Spanish Inquisition. That's what I mean to say. So it deserves more research into this subject, whether he really was so much a puppet, he knew what was going on, or whether he was tricked into it and didn't know what was going on. So let's come on to the next one. This is a very interesting story. Okay, so in the year 1488, Bernardino de Feltre, he was a Franciscan monk. This is such in my opinion, it's such a beautiful story. In the year 1488, Bernardino del Feltre was a Franciscan monk who walked into the city of Florence and gave them a lecture about the evils of borrowing money from Jewish people. Okay, so the city of Florence and the Medici family was the city where the Medici and the Jewish moneylenders were working together. And this Franciscan monk walked into the city and said, "This is unchristian of you to be borrowing all this money from this Jewish people." And he was kicked out of Florence. A Franciscan monk was kicked out of the city of Florence for giving them lecture on the evils of money lending. Such an interesting story. Okay, so I'm gonna go a little fast, but it's amazing that you're pulling these things up so fast. Okay, so now in the year 14 sorry, in the year 1492, Pope Alexander VI welcomes to Rome the Jews which had been expelled from Spain, right? As you know, in the year 1492, supposedly the Jews had been expelled from Spain. So, who was being expelled from Spain? It was the dark-skinned Jews, right? In the year 1492, the dark-skinned Jews were expelled from Spain, and the Pope was welcoming them to Rome, So this was definitely a puppet Pope. He knew what was going on, and he knew that these dark-skinned Jews were like second-class kind of Jews, right? Now we have in the year, this is so interesting. Okay, in the year 1513 was Pope Leo X. Pope Leo X was the first Medici Pope. Okay, so these Medici bankers bribed their way into letting one of their family members becoming Pope. So Pope Leo X was the first Medici banker Pope. Who came into power. If you scroll down under there, it says who was his successor. The successor of Pope Leo X was Pope Adrian VI on the right side there. Right. So Pope Adrian VI was the first Dutch Pope, right? Because at that time, the Medici of Italy and the Dutch had started cooperation from Florence to the Netherlands. This was the trade hub, So Medici bankers of Florence and basically the Jewish bankers of the Netherlands were working together. So you had this Medici Pope, and then you had a Dutch Pope. And then if you click the next successor, it's also another Medici Pope. Right, Pope Clement VII. So he was the second Medici Pope, Dutch banker. And if you click the next successor after him, Pope Paul the third, right? He was the third Medici Pope, an old man who just was sitting on the chair for a few years, And while he was Pope, it's very interesting. This is a very interesting. In the year 1536 was when the religion of Calvinism was created. So what happened was in the Netherlands, the Dutch created a new religion which is called Calvinism, which was a response to Lutheranism. Right? The Lutherans were against the Jewish people, right? Martin Luther was opposed to the Jewish moneylenders. But so then they had to create a new kind of Protestant movement which was not opposed to Jewish moneylendism. So that was Calvinism. The Dutch people created the Calvinism in the year 1536, okay? So now then this is so interesting. If you can go back to that Pope. Yeah, if you click his successor, Pope Julius the Third, the first pedophile pope. Pope Julius the Third, the first pedophile pope. It's like
He
they
looks
don't
like
even
one.
try. They don't even try to hide it. They pretty much admitted that there was this young boy who he was attracted to, and they kind of just kind of looked the other way, sort of. So this is the situation had become. After you got slavery, then you got these Medici popes, and it got worse and worse and worse until you even had a pedophile pope sitting on the throne. And then finally, let's see, after that, there did eventually become a good pope. So his name was Pope Paul IV. In the year 1555, Pope Paul IV confined the Jews to the Roman ghetto. And after he died, he was a very unpopular pope. The media at that time, even in the year 1555, the Jewish people pretty much controlled the media. So they painted him as a bad pope, after he died, because he wasn't playing along with their game. He was supposed to only confine the dark-skinned Jews. He was not supposed to confine the white-skinned Jews. But he did. So that's why I call him sort of one of the good popes. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to keep going quickly through this. In the year 1559, Pope Pius IV, he was a Medici Pope who reversed all the decisions made by the previous Pope. Okay, so one good Pope got in for a few years and he tried to make reforms, and then they got him out and they put another Medici Pope in place again. Pope Pius IV was another Medici Pope. But as soon as then, the following was Pope Pius V. Now, okay, I'm kind of going fast here for you. Where are you at now? Okay, Pope Pius V. Now, as I mentioned, Pope Pius V was a good pope, and there's a society of Pope Pius V. That's where they get their name from, the Society of Pope Pius V. They say that he was a good pope. And one of the things he did was he banned all the Jewish people from the Vatican cities, with an exception of two cities, Rome and and Ancona, the city within the Holy See, that what's called, sorry, what do you call the Papal States? There's a big piece of land they call the Papal States, and that Pope kicked out all the Jews from all of the Papal States except for two cities. Okay, he said, you guys can still live here on these two port cities because we're doing a lot of trade from these two ports, and we'll allow you to live in these two cities. So he was one of the last of the good popes, but there were some after him. Okay, so we had a period from 1572 until 1592. There's a 20-year period where we had several good popes which tried to make a reform. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, let me just say their names: Gregory the 13th, Sixtus the 5th, Urban the 7th, Gregory the 14th, and Pope Innocent the 9th. So that you had a series of popes. They were all pretty good. They tried to make reforms, but they weren't so successful. And then in the year 1592, Pope Clement the 8th, he really was a good pope. He tried to crack down on the Jews that were living in those last two cities and said, we don't even want you guys money lending anymore. And he also banned the Talmud. He said, you guys are not even allowed to read the Talmud anymore. So he was one of the last of the good popes. All right, where are we at? Clement the 8th. Okay, great. So if you don't mind, after him came another Medici pope, Pope Leo the 11th. And Pope Leo the 11th was a Medici pope who sat in power for only 26 days, because it was like, okay, it's enough of these good popes. So we're just going to quickly put in a Medici, and then we're going to put in puppets from then on. So he was the first of these of the new series of puppets. Right? Where are we at here? Pope Leo the 11th. Yep. So he was a Medici pope who only lasted 26 days. I'm going to try to skip forward a little bit here. Was there any other good popes? There were. In the year 1682, Pope Innocent the 11th wanted to pass a law to ban Jewish usury, but he failed to implement this law. Okay, so he was the last of the good popes. 1682, Pope Innocent the 11th, and then in 1689, Pope Alexander the 8th was brought back in as a puppet pope to wipe out all the changes which the previous pope tried to make. Okay. Then you had Pope Clement the 11th banned Freemasonry. This is kind of interesting. So in the year 1738, Pope Clement the 12th banned Freemasonry. Now, why did this pope ban Freemasonry? This was a puppet pope. Okay, why would he ban Freemasonry? The reason was because in the year 1738, the Jewish people had not gained control over Freemasonry yet. I mentioned this in one of our interviews. I want you to try to look up one thing. Maybe you can't even find it on Wikipedia, but you can try. It's called the Congress of Wilhelmsbad. Congress, Congress of Wilhelmsbad. Wilhelm, Wilhelmsbad 1782. Yes. I don't know if you can read it. But anyway, the Congress of this was when the Jewish people created the Illuminati. So before 1782, the Freemasons were actually anti-Judaism. Jewish people were banned from Freemason lodges before the year 1782. This is such an important year. So this was why the Pope banned the Freemasons in 1738, because at that time the Freemasons had not been taken under control yet, right? So it was a puppet pope who first banned the Freemasons. But after 1782, the Vatican didn't need to attack the Freemasons anymore, because the Freemasons were already puppets as well. Okay, let me breeze through the last few more set of popes here, if you don't mind.
Go right on ahead.
All right, thanks. All right. In the year 1749, Pope Benedict XIV passed a law which banned the forced conversion of Jewish people. So Christians were not allowed to force Jewish people to convert to Christianity. Now, in the year 1750, the Jewish people claim that they were expelled from Rome, but there's no proof of that. In the year 1753, the Jewish people claimed that the Christians started burning the Talmud in Rome, but there was no proof of that. In 1766, the Jewish people claimed that the cemetery and the synagogue were attacked in Rome, but of course there's no proof of that. So, these Jewish people always keep claiming, oh, we were attacked here, we were attacked there. Maybe we'll talk about that later. It's just so crazy. Now, in the year 1793, the Jewish people claim that the Christians attacked them for supporting Napoleon when Napoleon invaded the Vatican, right? So some of the Christians blamed Napoleon for getting help from the Jewish people, which of course he was, but of course the Jewish people deny that. No, we weren't helping Napoleon's troops. Okay, and finally, we have a few last of the good popes. In the year 1828, Pope Pius VII confined the Jews to the Roman ghetto after Napoleon had released them from the Roman ghetto. So probably some people are familiar with that. When Napoleon invaded the Vatican, one of the first things he did was he freed the Jews from the ghetto, right? And when the first pope was brought back into power, the first thing he did was put the Jewish people back into the ghetto after Napoleon had freed them. Then in the year 1823, Pope Leo XII cracked down both on Freemasons and the Jewish people. So this was one of the last of the good popes. In 1823, Leo XII realized that the Jewish people and the Freemasons were working together. So that's why he banned both Freemasonry and Judaism. Sorry about that. And finally, in the year 1850, Pope Pius IX returned from exile and started cracking down on the Jewish people in Rome. So Pope Pius IX was also a good pope. And in 1903, Pope Pius X rejected Theodore Herzl's call for a Jewish state. Okay? So that was one of the last of the good popes. 1903, Pope Pius IX came to power, and Pope Pius IX rejected Theodore Herzl's call for Zionism. Okay. Now, let me just mention a few more popes here in the recent years. In 1917, Pope Benedict XV supported the Balfour Declaration. Now, there's something very interesting here. Was Pope Pius XI. As you know, Pope Pius XI supported the Nazis, right? So the question is, why did Pope Pius XI support the Nazis? In my opinion, he was tricked into it. He was tricked into thinking that these Nazis were actually sincere about cracking down on Jewish money lending. Okay, so this was my opinion of what was going on. So I'm sure there's probably a lot of neo-Nazis who would disagree with me. They would say the Nazis were very sincere, and it was a good thing that this Pope was supporting them. But no, it's not. This was a puppet. This Pope was tricked into supporting them. You know, he thought that they were sincere. So now let's I want to finish with one last thing here, if you don't mind.
Do it.
So I'm going to share screen again, if you don't mind. So I'm going to try to bring us up to some current events, what's going on in modern times. Okay, I'm going to start here. Can you see this person by the name of Leonardo Boff?
Yep.
And when Leonardo Boff, formerly silenced by the CDF, enthusiastically proclaimed that Pope Francis had called him to ask for his materials in order to write his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, the impression was strengthened that the Argentinian pontiff had reconciled himself with liberation theology. Now, this liberation theology, if you look at the title of the passage, The Solved Conflict, Pope Francis and the Liberation Theology. I'm going to try to explain this. Liberation theology. Now, as we all know, Pope Francis was the first South American pope. And when he came in to power, a lot of South American people were quite sad about that because they felt he didn't represent them. So there was a conflict between this liberation theology and Pope Francis. And now here it's saying, I'm going to keep reading here. The impression was strengthened that the Argentinian pontiff had reconciled himself with liberation theology. No wonder that some of the fierce conservative opposition to Pope Francis accused the Argentinian of betraying the anti-communism of his predecessors for rehabilitating the Marxist liberation theology. Okay, now, these people accused him of betraying the anti-communism of his previous predecessors. It means some of the previous popes were very much anti-communist, which also means anti-Judaism, because most people know that communism was a Jewish thing. So some people were saying, oh, they were sad when this Argentinian pope came into power because they thought he was going to represent them on this anti-communism thing, but he wasn't doing it. So they were quite sad about that. But then if you keep reading here, it said they felt he had betrayed the anti-communism of his predecessors. But then In Boff's words, Francis is one of us. He has made liberation theology the common property of the church, and he has moreover extended it. So this Boff guy is one of the authors of the Book of Liberation Theology, and he said, no, no, no. Pope Francis is not betrayed anti-communism of his predecessors. Pope Francis is one of us. So this is a very interesting passage. Now I'm going to turn to the next page here. This is a Jesuit. This comes from a Jesuit webpage. So I'm going to read this just a little bit here. It says, one of the signs that the transformation is taking hold is the increasingly strident resistance it is provoking. The opposition to Francis throughout his pontificate has been at its most intense and ferocious precisely in his reform of authority and governance. So this is the Jesuits saying that Francis is a good pope, and the reason you can tell Francis is a good pope is because of all the opposition and all the resistance it is provoking. What is this opposition and resistance? Well, here's some of it. This intelligencer. Why Pope Francis is cracking down on the Latin Mass and angering the traditionalists. So there's a lot of Catholics who are being told that Pope Francis is cracking down on you guys. And also, they're also being told that Pope Francis is the tolerance of gay people and divorced people and blah, blah, blah. So the mainstream media is telling Catholics, oh, this Pope Francis is a bad guy. He's cracking down on Latin Mass. He's tolerant of gay people. So there's a lot of mainstream media who's trying to divide and conquer the church right now. So I want to look at his words here really quickly. What did Pope Francis actually say here? What is the actual words of Pope Francis? I'm going to read his words. This paper written by Francis, this is where the quote comes from. The supposed quote where supposedly Pope Francis became a supporter of LGBT. So here's the quote. I understand those who prefer a more rigorous pastoral care which leaves no room for confusion. So here what Pope Francis is saying, I understand those Catholic priests who are anti-LGBT. I understand them. They prefer a more rigorous care. They care for their church, and they don't want to leave any room for confusion. You're either a man or a woman. There's many Catholic priests who don't want any confusion about that. And Pope Francis says, I understand you, but I sincerely believe that Jesus wants a church attentive to the goodness which the Holy Spirit sows in the midst of human weakness. Now, this is the exact quote where he says that these LGBT people are in the midst of human weakness. So we need to be flexible, and maybe we can actually convert them into becoming Catholics, and maybe they'll stop being LGBT people. So this is the actual quote where Pope Francis actually said about, and this is where there's a lot of fake news going on now saying that Pope Francis is pro-LGBT. And this is the quote where they're drawing it from. And if you actually read it, he's not actually saying he's pro-LGBT. He's saying these people are in the midst of weakness, and we need to be tolerant of them, and maybe hopefully can help them someday. Now, finally, why is there so much controversy about this Pope? Well, here he is. in 2014, Pope Francis went to the apartheid wall to pray for Palestine. Free Palestine. So Pope Francis he made an announcement of his tour program where he announced that he was going to be stopping by the wall, and the pro-Palestine people spray painted Free Palestine on the wall, and Pope Francis put his hand on the wall to pray for Palestine. So now you see why there's so much opposition to this Pope. And finally, in the year 2021, Pope Francis visited with the president of Palestine, and Pope Francis affirmed his support for the two-state solution, right? That the state of Palestine should exist right along next side to Israel. So now you see why this Pope so much controversy. Now they really want him out of here. This is not a puppet Pope who is doing things like this, visiting the president of Palestine, affirming a two-state solution, stopping at the wall to pray for Palestine. So it's very interesting. We're going through very interesting times now. And maybe, some good things will happen in the future.
Yeah, 100%. Dr. Raza, that was a fantastic